All right, welcome back to Overcome Babylon. Trump has reportedly approved Iran attack plans, but is withholding final order. This was reported yesterday by Zero Hedge and other outlets as well. And Trump is quoted as saying the next week is going to be very big, maybe less than a week. And so those are ominous words, as Trump is also calling for regime change and to take out Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader. According to Al Jazeera, Donald Trump calls Iran's leader an easy target amid conflict with Israel. This rhetoric is insane. This rhetoric is heating up. And I have in my hands here a little excerpt. I'm going to go through some pages of a document that is a CIA-linked strategy for how both Israel and the U.S. plan to decapitate and take out Iran and its nuclear program step by step with tons of information. It's called Which Path to Persia. We're going to dive into this. I talked about it in my very last update, so go check that out if you have not already. This is the clear strategy, and although, people are saying and wondering, are we really going to enter a new war in the Middle East against Iran? It's already happening, okay? The media is playing games. Trump has been playing games because that's actually part of the strategy, is to let Israel go in first, make the first airstrikes on Iran, pretend like you had nothing to do with it, and incrementally increase the forces in the region, the assets, the military, move them over, and then when the moment is right, start doing joint Israeli-U.S. operations. This is exactly where we're headed, of course. We're headed for unprecedented times when I agree with Bernie Sanders more than I agree with 99% of conservative Christian evangelicals, churches, pastors, pulpits. When I agree more with Bernie Sanders than your average so-called conservative, we've got a problem. Netanyahu is not the president of the United States. Sanders posted on X. He should not be determining U.S. foreign and military policy. If the people of Israel support this decision or his decision to start a war with Iran, that is their business and their war. The United States must not be a part of it. Of course, if you've been following this channel, back when Trump was first elected, I was already telling you who was pulling the strings. In this particular video, entitled Trump is Now Fulfilling Bible Prophecy, Here's How. I told you, follow the money. Here's where the money's going. Got billions more in aid going to Israel right now. Nothing's changing under Trump. We already know, even though he says he's going to make America first, it's going to be Israel first as usual. And that is what Bernie Sanders is now calling out. And I wish everybody would call it out. Right, left, doesn't matter to me. And of course, this is the rhetoric now coming out from Trump as the U.S. gets ready for a war with Iran.
What's your message to Americans both here and abroad who are not only concerned about the U.S. potentially getting involved in another conflict in the Middle East, but worry about the potential for retaliation here at home?
Yeah, well, I don't want to get involved either, but I've been saying for 20 years, maybe longer, that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. I've been saying it for a long time, and I think they were a few weeks away from having one.
Okay, well, we've heard this rhetoric over and over again, but I like how he says, I've been talking about this for decades, 20 years. And that's exactly, this paper right here is a 2009 analysis paper of the new foreign policy that the U.S. should employ towards Iran. And so this is a decades-old plan. Trump is admitting that this is a decades-old plan. We've always wanted to demilitarize and have regime change in Iran. This is something that we've always wanted. Which Path to Persia, like I said, 2009 paper, let's take a look at it. Remember, I talked about this last time. I just want to mention it one more time. The disclaimer. This material has been reviewed by the CIA to prevent the disclosure of classified information. What they're saying is this is high-level analysis. We had to review it to make sure there's nothing classified because it's such a high level of analysis. But it doesn't have detailed battle plans, invasion routes, troop movements and deployments of exactly where things are going to happen. And that's why it's not classified. But all of the other information that's in here is so highly relevant and extremely helpful, especially if you want to understand how this is going to play out from a tactical standpoint to this new Iran-Israel war. So, again, if you like unprecedented information, breakthrough analysis like these, make sure you hit that subscribe, share this video, because this is all naked out in the open of what's going on, what already has been going on, and what's about to happen next with the Iran-Israel war that the U.S. is now being pulled into, at least on the surface. That's what they want us to believe. This is all very orchestrated. The U.S. and Israel had planned everything out to a T in advance, as I'll show you in this document. The central purpose of this document is to present the most important policy options available to the United States to craft a new strategy toward Iran, and to do so in a objective, neutral fashion is what basically they're saying. And so this document outlines 9 options that the U.S. has for dealing with Iran, and it's divided into 4 different parts. Let me check my notes here. The first part is going to be diplomacy, diplomatic options. The second part is going to be military options. The third part is going to be revolutions, like insurgency against the Iranian regime, and then of course a military coup, even if they can pull that off. And if you've been watching the news, that's what is happening. There are calls for revolution inside the country that are being provoked by Western sources, of course. And then part 4, so again, you have 9 options, 4 parts. Part 4 is containment, which are the sanctions and pressure on Iran, which have already been happening. So again, a lot of this strategy has already been employed. 4-part strategy with 9 different options. And here is why this paper is so relevant and why I'm excited to share it with you today, is to help you navigate through the fog and the nonsense of war that we're finding ourselves in. The document says Washington is probably limited to variations of the 9 approaches considered in this study, all of which involve significant or heavy costs, significant risks, and potentially painful trade-offs. So even though this document isn't classified, right? We don't want classified information on this channel anyway, right? That would be illegal or whatever. But these are the options that Washington and Jerusalem have on the table, and there's really nowhere else to run, because this is it. There's only so many finite things you can do in the situations in dealing with Iran, especially the one situation where Israel goes in first with airstrikes. That situation has now unfolded, and there's only so much that you can do, and we're going to talk about what they're planning next. And again, it is not the case that all of these options are meant to stand alone. Quite the contrary. The best American strategy towards Iran would be to combine several approaches, and which is exactly what they've done. They've already done the sanctions. They've already tried, different options for regime change in the past towards Iran, which have failed. There's different things that are being employed right now, and we're going to talk about why this is such breaking information in just a moment, such a breakthrough analysis. And the reason, again, the CIA greenlighted the publication of this document is because there's really no exact troop movements and deployments, but definitely the strategy is there. Leave it to Bibi, leave it to Benjamin Netanyahu is the title of Chapter 5. This is what they are doing now, allowing or encouraging an Israeli military strike. Both of those things. They've allowed it and they encouraged it, of course, behind closed doors, while publicly distancing themselves, pretending like they had nothing to do with it. And so what we're seeing here, the whole premise of this document, as far as why does the U.S. need to take out Iran anyway? Well, how come we can't just work with them diplomatically? How come we can't reach any consensus on anything? And so for the United States, it says, the Islamic Republic of Iran has been an enemy for 30 years, one that has sought to thwart U.S. policies in the Middle East, such as advancing the Arab-Israeli peace process and creating stable regional security arrangements. So basically, I'm going to break this down for you so that all of this doesn't go over your head, because the more you read documents like this and read the media and news out there, every time that this topic is brought up, the idea of American interests are at stake. American interests in the region are being affected. And these sorts of talking points, what is really meant by that is actually decoded for us inside of the Hillary Clinton email leaks, WikiLeaks. If you go to this one from 2000, I should say that, 2000, this is unclassified, you can see that the problem with a nuclear Iran, this is it, ready? To Israeli leaders, the real threat from a nuclear-armed Iran is not the prospect of an insane Iranian leader launching an unprovoked Iranian nuclear attack on Israel that would lead to the annihilation of both countries. Of course, that's what the media is telling us, right? There's going to be a nuclear holocaust if we don't do something. We have to take out Iran. They're just so crazy. Their rhetoric is so crazy. Death to America, death to Israel. We can't let them exist anymore as the regime that they are, especially with nuclear weapons, because they're just going to launch an unprovoked attack and wipe out Israel. No. That's again the fog, the smoke and mirrors. This is what this email says. What Israeli military leaders really worry about but cannot talk about is losing their nuclear monopoly. An Iranian nuclear weapons capability would not only end that nuclear monopoly, but also prompt other adversaries like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, to go nuclear as well. The result would be a precarious nuclear balance in which Israel could not respond to provocations with conventional military strikes on Syria and Lebanon as it can today. If Iran were to reach the threshold of a nuclear weapon state, Tehran would find it much easier to call on its allies in Syria and Hezbollah to strike Israel, knowing that its nuclear weapons would serve as a deterrent to Israel responding against Iran itself. So this is all about the balance of power. What that means is Israel having all the power by using weapons of mass destruction, particularly nuclear weapons, to make sure everybody's doing exactly what they want, all of their bidding, threat, intimidation, extortion, all of it able to be carried out against its neighbors, which we've obviously been seeing. They bombed Gaza, they bombed Lebanon ever since October 7th, 2023, of course. Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and now Iran. So we're looking at 5 countries just off the top of my head. And Israel doesn't want that to change. They want to be able to bomb whoever they want, whenever they want, for whatever reason, according to their national interests in the region, which of course is to keep the money printer going of the Federal Reserve, use the United States and America's blessing, continue to exploit that, print as much money as they want, keep the multi-trillion dollar deficit spending going to fuel military, to fuel all kinds of operations, exploit and extract those resources from the Middle East, to keep the war machine and the power hegemony of the West going, with Israel at the tippy top, able to bully the entire Middle East, and indeed the whole world, because they have a nuclear monopoly in the region. Whew, that was a mouthful. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure that you check out some of the other content on this channel that has to do more with the biblical prophetic side. Today I'm not going to be talking so much about the biblical, because we just need to talk about straight up analysis sometimes. But make sure that you get Bible Prophecy Secrets, where I outline, if you like the conspiratorial side of things and the deeper things, right? This is not for normies. This is not your regular average publication. Get Bible Prophecy Secrets, download it for free. There's a link down below to purchase a physical copy, which I highly recommend. And you can also support the channel here so I can continue to bring you breaking news and analysis that you're not going to find anywhere else. So, what's interesting is the rhetoric on page 90. Let me see am I on page 90? Yeah, I am. There is considerable reason to believe that under the right or wrong set of circumstances, Israel would launch an attack, principally airstrikes, but possibly backed by special forces operations, to destroy Iran's nuclear program. Okay, both of those things have now happened. We had the airstrikes, and we also had special forces inside of Iran launching covert operations. And then, of course, this will create an opportunity for American interests in the region. It's an opportunity because now the Americans can have all of their goals without any diplomatic issues. But of course, the U.S. has to get involved. They have to get entangled with this conflict. And I'm going to show you exactly why. I talked about it in the last update. If you got that last update, I talked about it in there. But I'll remind you again why the U.S. must get involved, because Israel cannot handle this on their own. So now that this is how it unfolded, of course, this is past tense. This is from 2009. This has already unfolded. In this case of Israeli airstrikes, an added element could be that the United States would encourage and perhaps even assist the Israelis in conducting the strikes themselves, in the expectation that both international criticism and Iranian retaliation would be deflected away from the U.S. and onto Israel. And that's exactly what happened initially, although it's getting especially with Trump's rhetoric, harder and harder to deny the U.S.'s involvement. It's pretty much everybody knows the U.S. is involved at this point, except for it just hasn't been officially announced. And so your average person doesn't realize this, but all the military strategists and planners on both sides, anybody who's watching this at a high level knows the U.S. has been involved since day one. And so one of the advantages of the Israeli airstrikes is that Israel doesn't care about getting or securing regional support for the operation. They don't have to, they can just kind of act unilaterally. They're not in NATO. They don't have treaties. I mean, they just kind of do whatever they want. And then the U.S. comes in to pick up the pieces and guarantee the protection of Jerusalem. And so Jerusalem felt, I'm kind of translating this document as I read it, right? But Jerusalem felt less motivated to wait for an Iranian provocation before attacking. They just went ahead and did it. Because why not? I mean, they have all the support, all the blessing of the U.S. to pull it off, and they need to have that dominance in the Middle East intact. So that's what we're looking at. This is the goal. This is the time frame. This is why Israeli airstrikes were carried out, because it's fast, effective. Israel doesn't care about its reputation, whereas the United States has to act with more secrecy and so forth. And so an Israeli air campaign against Iran would have a number of very important differences from an American campaign. And so there's some disadvantages, which I've pointed out in another update. Israel has no aircraft carriers, does not have long-range bombers, doesn't have refuelers. So it needs either the United States' help directly with those assets, which are now being sent to the Middle East. I'll show you that. I'll give you an update on everything that we know as far as assets being moved. But more importantly, they're going to need technological boosts from the U.S., and they're also going to need to be able to navigate different airspace and so forth. So let's talk about, let me see here. Hopefully I'm not missing some of the key details I wanted to talk about here. Got to go through my notes. Yes, indeed. Let's talk about the military equipment the Israelis might request, right, in the event of Israeli airstrikes, right, which have now come to pass. The Israelis might request additional military equipment, such as deep penetrating munitions, to make the attack more effective. More F-16s, F-15s, F-22s, or the latest defensive systems to help them defend against Iranian retaliation. That's all taking place now. So I want to point your attention to, oh goodness, Middle East Israel and U.S. modified F-35s to enable the Iran attack without refueling, sources say. So this increased the range of the fighter jets, the F-35s that Israel used. They used drop tanks, modified drop tanks, and it literally says that the U.S. and Israel made modifications to warplanes, the F-35s, to extend their range without the need for refueling or compromising on stealth to help Israel's attack on Iran. So the U.S. and Israel have already been working hand in hand, and that's why Israel was even able to carry out the attacks that it did so far. Pretty in your face, pretty open. The U.S. is already directly involved, and it's only going to get more intense. I'm going to show you where this is headed and what we can expect next. Again, the whole idea of an Israeli strike first is that the American perspective, the United States is not going to be culpable, not going to be blamed from the beginning. And so that's why this was such an attractive option for them to employ. Of course, Israel, here's some interesting information. Israel used Iraqi airspace to attack Iran. And of course, Iraq filed a complaint with the United Nations over Israel's violation of its airspace. And this was when the attacks broke out. But of course, you need to understand that the fall of the Syrian regime with Assad was also a big indicator that these strikes were about to come, because Israel needed to be able to fly through Syrian airspace to carry out the strikes as well. And so that's why Syria's new rulers faced unprecedented criticism as Israel uses their airspace to attack Iran. Again, this is from Middle East Eye. And if you recall, the new Syrian government under Giuliani is pro-West. Assad was not. And back on December 8th, 2024, when Assad was overthrown and a new government was installed in Syria, we should have known. All of us watching this should have known, oh, Israel needed that to happen so they could set up their military assets in the region and start launching their fighter jets directly from Syria to Iran, through Syria to Iran, through Syria, Iraq, and then Iran. Let me show you the map. So yes, right here you have the fall of Damascus. Of course, they can travel directly and hit Iran's western border, no doubt. It's harder for them to reach the interior of Iran, which I believe is where the Fordo nuclear facility is located. So that's where U.S. help is going to be required to make these bombing campaigns more effective and reach different areas of Iran that they're currently not able to reach. But make no mistake about it, IDF was able to go through Syria, Iraq, and then to Iran, and that's how they were carrying out those airstrikes. It's all documented here in the playbook. And of course, just as a reminder, the aircraft that Israel is using would be American produced, supplied, and funded, and much of the ordnance would be American made. In fact, $3 billion in U.S. assistance annually sustains the IDF's conventional superiority in the region. I just want to remind you of that everything Israel has is from the U.S., okay? And the modified F-35s that we're reading about here from Middle East side, that's from the U.S. helping and enabling those modifications to take place. So this is all hand in hand. Let me see what else I have for you here. There's a couple of other things. I did skip one detail that I really wanted to point out. 92, let's go to page 92. Remember that Israel does not have all the equipment that it needs to really pull off an effective military campaign against Iran. And so they needed to recruit the U.S. into this war, but the U.S. didn't want to go in. It'd be very unpopular, just like Iraq and Afghanistan were. They're not going to pull off a George Bush saying we need to go after those weapons of mass destruction, although it's the same exact talking point. The U.S. military-industrial complex has learned to change kind of the way they're doing things. And, with Israel, there's so many Zionists in the United States. There's so many people that are pro-Israel just for the sake of being pro-Israel without really understanding or even taking time to consider any other logic. I mean, people are so brainwashed that, of course, that's a great way. Let's just have Israel attack, and then any average conservative and most people in the United States are going to be basically, more or less complicit with this whole plan. And yeah, we need to take out those weapons of mass destruction in Iran. So this is the new approach, especially with Trump, who's supposed to be this really tough leader, has a cult following. Unlike George W. Bush, he never had the cult following like Trump. So it's all playing out really nicely. It's all been set up really nicely on the propaganda side. And here are the advantages of everything that we're seeing now. The most salient advantage this option has over that of an American air campaign is the possibility that Israel alone will be blamed for the attack. That's what happened initially. Israeli forces can execute the attack faster with much less prior notice because they act unilaterally, as I've mentioned. And then it's easier to convince Israel to mount the attack than it would be to generate domestic political support for another war in the Middle East. Like George Bush, the Bush era, I mean, the Americans don't want another war in the Middle East, but if Israel does it and then we're dragged in, that's no problem. And I just want to remind you of one thing here. Let's go do a keyword search here for 100. That's what this article is saying, or this publication is saying. Remember that the Israelis have around 100 nuclear devices and can deliver them by aircraft. But in order for this campaign that's now started, that we're now sucked into to be successful, there must be an American nuclear guarantee that would provide the reassurance that this is going to be successful to decapitate, demilitarize, and overthrow the Iranian government. The United States must guarantee Israel a nuclear umbrella. Then Iran will be put in its place, is what this publication is saying. And that is why you're now seeing what you're seeing with, let me zoom out here, Newsweek reporting the full list of U.S. military deployments that point to a war with Iran. That's why you're seeing this now. You have fighter aircraft, tanker aircraft, 24 aerial refuelers, bombers at Diego Garcia. I've talked about all these things. You have warfare support vessels, carrier groups. You have the USS Carl Vinson, the USS Nimitz, carrier strike groups, each one having at least 7,500 American personnel aboard, missile defenses, and you, of course, have the Doomsday plane flying over the U.S., basically an ominous warning that we are expecting retaliation and perhaps need to have nuclear forces on standby to deploy nukes if necessary, if there's some sort of a first strike from Russia. If Russia gets involved, I mean, this is getting completely out of control, but it was all prophesied this way. And what this really is, when it all boils down to it, is exactly what I've been warning about on this channel with BRICS. This is from Sputnik International, an opinion analysis piece, very opinionated, as you'll see in a second. But Iran is now the first line of defense of BRICS and the global south. And here is the crux of the matter. You want to know what's really going on? I've already kind of explained it with that WikiLeaks email and some of the other commentary I've given you, but here's what's going on. In a nutshell, the Iranian response turned the chessboard completely upside down. The circus ringmaster, aka Trump, complete with hosting a pathetic military parade in Washington, is naked. Again, I told you this is a very opinionated piece. And unmasked. He now owns not one but two proxy wars against Russia and against Iran, with neo-Nazis in Kiev and genocidals in Tel Aviv on the front lines. All of part of the big picture war against BRICS. By now it's clear, even for the deaf, dumb, and blind, that this was never about the Iranian nuclear program or the effort to construct the Trump-owned JCPOA, or Iran Nuclear Deal 2.0. It is about a lifelong Zionist Axis obsession, regime change in Iran. What did Trump say? Oh, I've been telling people for 20 years. I know I campaigned on peace and peace through strength. But no. Regime change. Regime change has been the goal. This is what's now unfolding. And what this is going to lead to eventually is preemptive strikes, nuclear strikes, or maybe retaliatory nuclear strikes of BRICS nations, including but not limited to Russia, with the most advanced nuclear weapons on the table, against the United States on American soil. And so you should be expecting this. This is why this is such a big deal. We are knocking on the door of the Great Tribulation, for the wages of sin is death. But the gift of God is eternal life through Christ Jesus our Lord. That's what Romans 6:23 says. The wages of sin is death. And America, with its endless wars, ever since it's been a nation, it's been at war. Israel, with its endless wars, with Western hegemony, with all of the bullying, for lack of a better word, right? The narcissistic bullying, the hegemony, the Western hegemony of the printing press dominating the world, dominating and extracting all the resources of the world to keep a deficit spending money printing machine going. That's sin. That's demonic. On so many different levels, the wages of sin is death. In this country, the United States will reap what it has sown, and you should be expecting multiple major economic cities in the United States to be turned into glass with nuclear warheads by Russia, and you should also be expecting military bases and infrastructure to be targeted in the coming war. Prepare yourself accordingly. Get Bible prophecy secrets. My book explains way more detail than I'm able to give you in this video, covering this CIA-linked document from 2009. God bless you. I'm your brother Abraham. Stay tuned for more updates and continue to rise up and overcome this crooked, perverse, and wicked generation with me.